I'll just put this on silent.
Yeah, thank you.
Been playing with Cairns traffic.
Jeff, thanks for coming. Now, you're a clinical psychologist in practice here in Cairns.
Yes.
And you've been in the game a long time.
Yes.
And thanks for coming and speaking with us today. We've got till 11:45. You'll give us a presentation, no doubt, and then Commissioner Fredericks and I will ask a number of questions, and then we'll open up to the floor. So, as I've said earlier, our work is essentially grounded in these sorts of consultations and presentations. So we welcome you, we thank you, and looking very much forward to hearing what you've got to say to us this morning.
All right. I'll start at the beginning. I'm going to sort of try to float something which is a little bit left of centre, but anyway, that's what we do, I suppose. Look, basically, I want to look at three different things. One is the idea that jail is an alternative environment. It's not a consequence of unlawful behaviour. So whether I live in an environment A or B has its different costs and benefits. I want to look at the idea that incarceration is rehabilitation. And you'll find that I'm not very positive on that. And I want to talk about an alternative sentencing option based on the Charters Towers Rehabilitation Unit. I don't know if anyone knows about that unit. It's mainly for dual disability, so people with developmental disability and mental health concerns go into that unit, and there's a long protracted process where they come out the other end independent, capable, able to negotiate the world. And I think there's extreme overlap between the population definitely in Lotus Glen and Charters Towers. I also want to talk about a potential pilot process that might allow us to look at whether the alternative sentencing option could be viable in terms of dollars and cents. And I don't know anything about money, so I just allow for my sort of limitations there. So jail is an alternative environment. It sounds like I'm saying, well, life in the community is rubbish and life is much better in custody. Most people would say that's clearly not the case, but I'd argue that maybe not so much you wake up in the morning and choose to go to prison, but the fact that you might be sent to prison is not such a huge disincentive. So what I mean by that is, even if you look at, I don't know how many people know what it's like inside a prison, but if you look at the food that you're given, the fact that you've got a single or shared accommodation, you got access to TV, you got access to media, there's a lot of things there. You've got access to programs, you've got sporting opportunities. Now, obviously, I'm telling you about all the positives. There's also some negatives that go with it. But if you think about those things being the basics of everyday life, and the fact that on Centrelink you get $240 a week, I'd argue that there's no way in the world you can actually have that lifestyle on the outside on $240 a week.
Jeff, are these comments, just to clarify, specifically regarding people in a remote, discrete community?
No.
Or generally?
Just more generally.
Okay.
The sort of what backs that up is that, you know, in custody, you've got limited opportunities to actually have a job. You know, not everyone can be employed, because I'm only talking about Lotus Glen here, I'm not talking about South. A lot of guys who are doing longer sentences will work for 8 years straight. Now, you don't get that opportunity out here. You come out of jail, you know, if you've served 8 to 10, which means you've done something pretty serious, you go to an employer, employers don't really want to know you that much. By having a job, by getting up in the morning, going to work with different guys, you know, achieving outcomes, producing a product, it's validating, it's a sense of purpose. You come out, you have to report to parole, you know, once a week or maybe twice a week, or, you know, then it sort of stretches out. Possibly you need to do programs, possibly you have to work with people like me, which, you know, I'm not always that friendly. It's difficult to get on with life. so many of my guys come into me after being out for 2 weeks saying, I just want to go back. Because being back is simple. It works. So when I say jail as an alternative environment, I see that as far as recidivism going as the disincentive to offend isn't there, or it's marginally there. When you work with guys who go in for the first time or are doing their first longer term, it's important to say to them, don't have a life here. Your life belongs out in the community. Because once guys get caught up in the to and fro of the prison environment, they get caught up in the politics, they get caught up in the schemes and what I can get and all the rest of it. It's all consuming, but it's also very satisfying. So you adapt to your environment. I suppose the other thing that's not mentioned all that much, and it's more affects female family members, is, there's a lot of press at the moment about Indigenous suicide. Now, if you break down through the prevalence rates, we work out that we lose 160 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people roughly a year across Australia. We lose many, many more to jail. Now, for a lot of guys going in, there's a lot of family inside. And that's just not just an Indigenous thing, but I just want to focus on the Indigenous side of it for a minute. Guys are well supported inside by family most of the time, as much as they can be. The matriarch, the mothers of the family, the sisters, the nieces, they lose contact with that person who's inside. Now, we know that we're looking at 60% recidivism. And a lot of guys will go in young and they'll keep bouncing in and out. So the grief and loss stuff, which hasn't really been explored that fully in Australia, has been fairly well explored in America. And the statistics are quite alarming about the negative effects it has on female family members. Because even going to visit isn't that pleasant. I know I was talking to a colleague in Darwin this morning, and she was saying that, to go and visit in Darwin, you need to, the dogs are put over you, the sniffer dogs, and you have to consent to some sort of search to go and visit a family member. It's a bit tough. So that's the idea. If we're talking about recidivism, if jail doesn't have any disincentive, why do we expect people to not do what they've done before? The second point I want to talk about is jail as being rehabilitation. And I think we need to seriously look at the characteristics of who actually goes to jail. Do we know whether it's the rich or the poor? Do we know that if you can afford a $50,000 barrister, you're less likely to be put in jail? I know that legal aid do what they can. I think, guys go into jail, they do a needs analysis when they first get in, and there's not a lot more known about them. I write reports for court. I request that a report is forwarded to the jail so that at least the sentence management have an understanding of who this person may be. But full assessment, intellectual, social, emotional, is not done as practice. So if we just pick a number in Lotus Glen, we've got 800 people roughly. I know we've got more than that. Let's work on 800. People from Synapse in Brisbane have publicly stated that 95% of the Indigenous people in Lotus Glen are intellectually impaired. Now, when you actually challenge Synapse on that, they didn't do any assessment. They're picking a number out of the sky. Assessment will allow us to say these people are not impaired or they are impaired, but to do it from a very valid scientific basis. Once we know a person's capacity, capability, limitations, then we work with that person knowing what we know. It's those limitations possibly that contribute to why the person's in jail anyway. Because Impulse control is challenged. I know there's a lot of, the previous talker was talking about fetal alcohol. I've done a lot of that work, but for me that's not particularly interesting. For me it's about, well, how does this person present? So if we're a responsible bureaucracy working with people that are in our care, how do we work with that particular person? Assessment isn't necessarily incredibly expensive. You've got a group of, I think, 5 or maybe 8 psychologists who are employed in Lotus Glen. They can do this stuff. They choose not to. If we're going to rehabilitate, we need to know what we're rehabilitating from, or is it about only having people not offending? So if we just focus on the offending behaviour, it's all done, tick the box, thanks very much. It doesn't work. We need to work with the person as a whole. And this is why I'll talk about alternative sentencing options a little bit later on, and possibly a way of proving to government that maybe this is not that costly alternative that will have better outcomes. And I could be completely wrong. So please, I take responsibility for that. I get called in to actually provide services for guys in jail who don't do well in group. I always like to know at what stage of their sentence they're at. Are they towards the end? Because the argument logically would be that if I have a guy in the last 2 months of his time incarcerated, I'll have him for the next 3 months when he's out in the community, that's going to be far more effective than me having him for a full year inside. Because recovery is it's an experiential process. We need to work with the people when they're being tempted by different complexities of community. You don't have that in jail. It's pretty straightforward. Rehabilitation has to go past the release date, if they're talking about rehabilitation. The other thing in that is, we have an education wing at Lotus, and I don't know how effectively that's used. We have a wood shop, we have a metal shop, we have a tailor shop. We have lots and lots of computers up there. You talk to the old guys up there and they said that in the earlier days, people could do a trade. So you could come out as a chippy, or you could come out as a metal worker, boiler maker. Why aren't we doing that? So the idea of rehabilitation is someone comes out of a period of incarceration and they're able to succeed in the community, not endure the community and want to go back. Surely if we've already got supervisors sitting in those shops, are they not qualified to actually take people through an apprenticeship? Or do we see that as rewarding bad behaviour? Look, I'm not asking for a lot here, but I think if guys are choosing to go to work 4 days a week in Lotus, and that's the same in other centres, coming out with a piece of paper that means they can get a job is really important. There's the negative side, well, you've done time, this is what I did, this is the conversation with an employer. Spent conviction legislation doesn't work, we know that. They can say, look, yeah, I've done time, but I've got this trade and I've been working with tools for the last 8 years of my life. That's a work-ready person, isn't it? Surely. And also too, by actually being in a process where you're achieving, so if it's competency-based training, like an apprenticeship is, that's really empowering. It's really quite exciting to, say I've got a trade, or I've done a university degree. Because there are universities that actually provide education into jails. The other thing is, I've got written here yearning to return. So that desire to be in the community, and that will come with being looked after well, by actually achieving something, being validated, actually having your mental health improve, having guys able to say, look, I'm doing really well, but this thing is sticking. So if they've done something really, really serious in the crime world, how do I get past this bit? So a guy who's wanting to get up and be motivated and achieve is more likely to put their hand up than someone who's just going, well, I've got another 4 years to go. I'll just sit here and not do too much. So jails can be very rehabilitative, I'm sure. I don't think it's going to be particularly expensive to change them, tweak them a bit. But I don't know how we say to government, well, maybe we do this differently and it's going to cost you extra money, but look what we might get. Because we're selling faith to the government. This might work. I mean, if someone come to you and said, look, give us an extra 100 grand and you might get a return on it, would you give them 100 grand? You know. Alternative destinations. So we've got, if you look at the normal processes, you have kids growing up, they sort of go, they might get expelled from school or suspended or get sick of school and fall into sort of a disengaged crew. They'll go to court quite a few times. They'll be dealt with through formal warnings lots and lots of times. They'll eventually get to court and they'll be possibly given an order, or they'll go to Cleveland detention in Townsville. After that, they'll get out. They may reoffend, and they may reoffend at a more serious level, and that may be due to things they've picked up while they're being in Cleveland. And I really believe that is happening at the moment, but it's only my personal belief, so I don't bring that from anywhere else. The court is stuck. I mean, they go, do we let this person go back into the community and risk the chance of reoffending and seriously hurting another victim, or do we remove them from the community? Because number one, the community is thought to be safer, and two, maybe they'll change while inside. Now, the maybe they'll change seems quite ridiculous if you don't have any plan about how you're going to work with the person so the positive change comes. Now, there's a centre in Charters Towers. It closed down, but I believe it's reopened again. It's a Charters Towers Rehabilitation Unit, and it's run by Queensland Health, and it's designed solely for people who are dual disability, which is intellectual impairment or any other developmental disability, and it's also mental health. Now, we know that if intellectual impairment is not picked up in young children, they're 70% more likely to go on to develop a serious mental health issue, and that means psychosis. So automatically, by not assessing and not identifying, we're increasing the probability that we can have some pretty messed up people in the community. The way Charters Towers works is there's different stages, and the process is you start at an area where it's really, really high care, high needs, and the process there is actually developing some sense of self, some competencies, and you move from, I think, stage 7 to stage 6. Eventually you get to stage 1, you're coming and going from the centre as you wish, and then you move out. Now, what that means is you come in mental health, or mental illness, I should say, developmental disability, and you come out able to engage with the world. If mental illness is still part of your life, it's very well managed and self-managed, and life goes on.
Jeff, just to clarify, are these people that are deemed not fit to plead?
No, that's a very different place again, and I'll come back to that if you ask.
So
that
the process to get to the Charters Towers facility?
That's nothing to do with crime.
Okay.
That's clearly within I think it's communities and Queensland health systems.
Gotcha.
But what I'm arguing is that
As a model,
and also to the fact that if we seriously assessed in jail, and based on international statistics, we know that up to 70% of the population is IQ 85 or less. Now, everyone talks about IQ 70, 2 standard deviations, which will actually get you some sort of benefits, NDIS, well, it's now NDIS, some sort of support to get through life. If you're 71 to 85, you're deemed borderline intellectually impaired. And the sad part about that mob is they don't get any care and they can't quite negotiate the world. So that's really, really, if you've got a choice between 71 and 69, put your hand up for 69, eh? Because it's far better. So I've done a lot of assessment in community, a lot of assessment in the Cape, a lot of assessment in Lotus Glen, and the numbers are not exciting by any stretch. And to me, the number doesn't mean that much, but what we do know is that the people who are struggling intellectually will struggle to get through life. And also too, when you think about it, this makes sense. When they do crime, they're more likely to get caught. And when they do go to court, they'll say yes because it pleases the other person. A lot of them don't know why they say yes. Yes is guilty. Then they're incarcerated. And I would challenge anyone to prove to me that a lot of these guys can actually understand the court process, but they just go blindly through. So the reason why I talk about the Charles Towers model is I don't see there being incredible difference between what we've got in Lotus. Bearing in mind there's a lot of guys doing very well in Lotus intellectually and developmentally. And the only real difference is that someone's been caught for a crime and put their hand up or was proven guilty by a jury, and the others may have committed a crime but didn't get caught, or no one committed any crimes, which is great. Now, how would we say to the government, well, maybe this is the way we need to do it? How do we actually say we need to take an approach that's all about support, education, and learning adaptive skills? And I've said this before, the way we could possibly do that is create some sort of pilot, which is a word I really detest, some sort of process where we maybe use one unit in an established centre that has 30 to 54 guys in it, and that becomes the Charters Towers model. And we hand pick the staff who work there. So I mean the custodials. They have to be part of the process. They can't be derailing the process. All services provided, psychological, education, health, the whole lot, assessment, you name it, is done by externals who are duly qualified, duly experienced, and don't judge. And we roll it out. We do the assessment, we do continuous assessment, we do reporting, we look at the numbers, we need to look at the costs. What does it actually cost to do that in comparison to the normal process? And then we follow those guys for another 2 years. They get let out. We call them back every 3 months, we'll meet them in community and look at, what they're thinking about recidivism, look at their general well-being, look at their level of engagement with the community. Let them tell us the challenges that they've got. Now, the post part, the 2 years post-release, wouldn't be that expensive, really. And you could use different university students to do a lot of that work, because especially in those, I talk from a psychology perspective because that's what I am. People who are doing clinical masters need to do projects, and they need to be good, otherwise they don't practice. So we could recruit some of that man-woman power, I suppose. They call it human power. What do they call it these days? I can't say manpower. Anyway, to do that part of it, and then we write a comprehensive report to the government and say, this is what it costs, this is the outcome. Why can't we do it larger scale? Now, I know that Barallan has a sort of idea of being a more educative process, and I don't know the ins and outs of that place. But the way I see working with my guys at the moment is that most of them will go back. It's the nature of the beast. A few things I want to just throw up as comments. One is that non-custodial staff in prisons shouldn't be wearing blue. No. That's complete madness. I work as an external. The psychs who work in the prison are seen as prison. There is no rapport, there is no trust.
It's as simple as the colour of the outfit.
They're wearing the uniform.
Yep.
You know, you are the bad guy.
Okay.
And really, you think corrections would actually save money through that, wouldn't they? You don't have to supply the uniform.
Uniform supply would.
You know, automatically. And it would change the nature of the beast. They would be seen as psychologists, not as correctional services staff, even though they're getting paid by corrections. I think that could be very, very different. In the early assessment process, look at educational outcomes. Where are they academically? Not as far as any sort of intelligence stuff, but I mean, do they go to grade 6? That, you know, a lot of the guys from the Cape, school stops at grade 6 now. It used to be grade 7. A lot of guys don't do the transition into, and girls, I'm just talking about guys because of the jail, they don't do the transition into boarding school well. They bounce back. We lose them. Right, so if we know that someone's only gone to grade 6, can we actually provide education that's targeted to a particular person so that when they try to negotiate or they're in better position, if they can do grades 7 and 8, can they do grade 9 and 10? You know, I know it's interrupted. I know a lot of guys do short sentences, but they come back. And the other thing is that can probation parole actually provide mentors into the community? You know, we have case management, and I know they've got large lists, but a guy who's done 20 years, you know, bring them out into the community and see how they go. I know a guy who did 8 years, and he said he's told me he got on a bus 12 times and got off 11 because he didn't know how to ask for a ticket. No one told him how. You know, negotiate Centrelink. I challenge you, you know. And if you've been in jail for that time, it's a nightmare. Peter's comments. That's what I've got to say. I mean, probably for me it'd be better if you sort of threw things in the air and I could talk about them. But I really think we need to look at the population, what we're doing, and why would we expect people not to offend when the disincentives are this big?
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. Kim.
Jeff, you mentioned earlier that recidivism is easy. A number of us have seen inside a range of prisons that, you know, despite what the media may think, they're not motels. And, you know, I understand a bed and 3 meals a day, and some of those things are maybe a better environment than some of the guys and girls are in that go to jail. I'm personally really attracted to the idea of people leaving jail with a skill or a ticket or something to ensure they have a better chance at surviving outside when they've been inside. What is a typical prisoner, if there is such a thing, open-minded and wants to actually learn a skill and not go back, or is the pull of going back in with friends, family, and his or her tribe, you know, that significant that people just want to come back and aren't going to work too hard at improving life?
I think even if you take it outside of the jail environment,
Yep.
The belief that you can achieve in the mainstream world, and it's difficult. You know, why would I believe that I can actually get a ticket and have a full-time job? You know, a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander guys do. A lot don't. And it's like, why would I try? Because I'm just going to get knocked back.
So will they be receptive to a different model or other new initiatives inside?
I mean, you've got Barma Services right now. This isn't to do with jail per se, right? But Barma have got some fairly sizable contracts through the Cape, through the Torres. It's all Indigenous workforce. Guys are able to do apprenticeships there. They do really well. Yeah, and there's a whole program wrapped around that, a wellbeing program where everyone is supported to come to work every day. And if there's a struggle at home, how do we actually support you through that?
Right. So there's good evidence out there that these things produce good outcomes.
Yeah, and also too, I mean, the other thing is that, you know, Barma's more relies on funding and it's now getting contracts. But if you had an independent contractor that said, all right, I'm going to employ guys who have come out of Lotus, right? And obviously there's going to be rules around all that sort of stuff, and there'll be your ongoing drug and alcohol testing, which happens in most work sites now anyway.
It does.
It gives the guys the idea that I can go and get a job. If you went to, I don't know, everyone's been to McLeod Street, the boarding house there, you'd want to go back to jail. The conditions of places, those halfway type houses that you're paroled to, there's no incentive to get up and do something because it's too hard. If there's, it'd be great for someone to go, right, I'm going to employ 10 guys from Lotus and have it known in Lotus that, if you do your ticket or whatever it is, you've got a job to go to. I think you'd be really, really surprised about how much enthusiasm there'd be.
In terms of the model proposed, Andy, is Andy here? He stepped out. Okay. But Barrelon is partly that from what I've observed,
right.
And it sounds like that's what they're hoping for. Those services that you indicated would need to be wrapped around it may or may not exist at Barrelon to the extent you talked about. But I think it's a part model of the model you talked about. But again, it's only one of the correctional facilities. It's not common to all.
Look, I don't think the problem is the behaviour. So the offending behaviour is what gets people in jail. It's the intention and level of thought and decision making that sits underneath the behaviour that's the concern. Like, everyone can do bad stuff. But to choose that, well, that was really, really stupid. He didn't have enough insight to go, that was really stupid, I won't do that again. That's the more important part of it.
I'm going to just open it up to the floor. If there's any questions, we've probably got time for one, maybe two questions. Please just a reminder to say your name and where you're from in asking a question. Yes.
My name is Judy Andrews, and I used to work for Adult Queensland Families and Business Support, which is no longer.
Thanks, Judy.
I'd really like to point out outside services and getting the professional staff and non-custodial staff out of uniform, because that was a really bad regulatory change. And over the years, our organisation used to go once a week and do general welfare stuff and get paid a small fee for it. Incidentally, our staff always wore bright colours.
Not blue.
But there were also a number of other outside organisations that went in. Over the years, those access for organisations has been restricted, and they say, oh, but we've got our own psychologists, we've got our own this, but of course they're not trusted. And some of them say they're not trustworthy either. How can that trend be reversed and get more outside people in, so that
I think
that's also building community links during their time there.
Okay. And just to clarify, Jeff and Judy, you seem to be in furious agreement. There is a significant lack of trust if somebody's in a prison uniform.
Yes.
Correctional officer uniform.
And also too, I mean, the thing is that there's a requirement on people wearing blue uniforms to report anything they know to Intel, right? Now, if you're working as a psychologist and the whole thing around confidentiality, it changes the whole thing, because if you say to your psych, well, this is what's going on, this is what I'm struggling with, and or you suspect that goes straight to Intel, you're not going to have that conversation. Because, we all know that if you're identified inside as being, a dog, so to speak, or life's not really that much fun.
So there's a significant opportunity here, perhaps to improve trust and outcomes.
Yes,
By
Tan.
giving funding outside organisations to provide services rather than employing more service staff within corrective services, I would suggest.
I'm going to move to one more question.
My name's Tanya Colin from the Cape York Institute. Jeff, could you tell us a bit about what you've seen people struggling with regards to their social norms from where they grew up, or the culture they live in? I'm talking about remote, discrete communities, when they come to Cairns, and that it appears to be a disjunct between what's expected in their home community and what's expected in a more mainstream setting that people end up struggling with? Or
I suppose that one of the most obvious is the ideas around acceptable behaviour versus antisocial, unlawful behaviour. So in a place like Arakoon, a lot of the behaviours that are seen as just required, you get locked up for in Cairns. Guys who have done a fairly big stretch in jail who get out, you always have to have the last word in jail. You can't let something float past because that affects your reputation. Now, in the community of Cairns, that doesn't bear well for you. I'm not sure I'm answering that question. It's like, for me, one of the biggest things is that the people who come in from, and I saw it, it's not just here. So if you look in the Kimberley, right? So if you look at people from Columbaroo or Bulgari, the communities in East Kimberley, they'll either go to Kununurra or they'll go to Derby when they're getting out of community. The same sort of behaviours that you see in community that are most troublesome are exactly the same in Kununurra and Derby. But then if that person goes to Perth, the chances that they won't come to the attention of the police are about zero. Right? So what I know, and there was a case here, I won't mention it, where someone acted according to what he believed was okay in community, and now he's doing a very long stretch. It doesn't excuse his behaviour, but it says a lot about the effect of community on what he sees as being okay.
All right. Mick, last question.
Mick Shaw, Cape Institute. Thanks a lot, Jeff. That was really interesting. And just in terms of your experience the last 10 or 15 years, I mean, all the stats we're reading about Indigenous overrepresentation, incarceration, it's getting rapidly worse. I just want you to reflect on, I guess, what you see. Have you seen? Does that play out what you see? And what's it linked to? Is it the rate of offending, or what is it? Is there a whole generation coming through now that we have to track back 20 years to see what really happened? What your reflections are on that, the data that we're seeing coming through?
Look, I think we did. You're probably aware. I did all the assessment in the Cape with the CYA schools right now, and that's in the public space. And we looked at numbers of 33% intellectually impaired and up to 70% under that borderline level. And not only that, if you look at their executives, so the frontal lobe functioning is also quite low. Emotional and social development also low. Now, schools go, and this is something that, schools have kids in the Cape till grade 6, it used to be grade 7. If a kid goes to school for 40 weeks and he averages 80% attendance, which is a high ask, the school will be responsible for that child for 11% of their life. The other 89% sits with family. Now, you've got kids who are now seeing fourth generation unemployed or more. Education is not valuable. It's not valued. So these are the kids that are coming through, and we now have a much more mobile population. So as a kid from East Kimberley or from the Cape, you can be in Sydney tomorrow and Melbourne the next day. The kid's not being prepared for that. We're talking about, this morning I was talking to a psych, she's a Murray girl, about kids who are going through the Yulari process. They're going to Melbourne Grammar and all the best schools. And she was saying some of those kids are from the Halls Creek area and they're going back and they're working in the shop. And they're really, really getting unhinged because they've got 5 years of this really, really flash, Melbourne Grammar, that's pretty special. You come back to Halls Creek, there's no jobs. And they'll see Halls Creek through a different set of eyes. They've had exposure to something different. They know that they're thinking possibly at a different level. So I think the more that we provide kids opportunities for education away from community, the more we need to think about what happens next.
Jeff, just to unpack that just a little further, we're just about the end of our time. Our first speaker, Anne Russell, talked about the relatively high incidence of FASD and the impact it has on kids. Is it simply not valuing education, despite not having a FASD or other physical ailments, it still produces that, borderline potential IQ level and issues. So it's much bigger than the underlying physical ailment issue, hearing, eyes, as the essentially education itself, the lack of it.
Yeah, education is not important. Education in schools, in some of the schools in the Cape, is something to do. We went through a process in 2015 where we actually had to push to have kids suspended because the kids were really, really, really off the wall. Kids wouldn't leave the school. They didn't want to be in the classroom, but the school was safe. So not only you got kids who have had in utero, but also too they've experienced lots of really bad stuff as young kids.
Yep.
The capacity to learn and to apply knowledge and to cope in a world that is unfamiliar is very much diminished if you're working in lower brain, hypervigilance. And these are the kids that will go to jail because they can't cope.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thanks, Jeff.
That concludes the session for Jeff Nelson, clinical psychologist who's working in the Cairns region. Thanks.
Thank you.